There are moments in history that never made it into books. Moments where survival wasn't guaranteed, where a single choice separated existence from extinction. Long before cities, before language as we know it, before we conquered fire and steel, our ancestors faced horrors we can barely imagine. This is the story of Kale, a young hunter from a dying tribe, who stood face to face with a creature that should have erased humanity from the earth. A beast so massive, so merciless that even the wolves fled at its roar. This is the day humans faced the giant lion, and the day we learned what it truly meant to survive. If you want to journey back to our darkest hour, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. Now, let me take you back 40,000 years to the frozen heart of the Ice Age. Kyle's hands trembled as he knelt beside the frozen riverbank, not from the cold, though the wind cut through his hide wrappings like broken glass, but from hunger. 3 days. 3 days since the tribe had eaten anything more than bark and melted snow. The Ice Age had turned the world into a white graveyard, and Kale's people, the last of the Firekeepers, were dying. He was 19 winters old, though his eyes carried the weight of someone much older. 2 moons ago he'd watched his younger sister, Nira, slip away from starvation, her small body growing cold in his arms, while the fire they'd so carefully guarded flickered uselessly against the dark. His father, the tribe's chief, had walked into a blizzard the next day and never returned. Some said he went looking for food. Kale knew the truth. His father had gone to die with honor rather than watch his people fade. Now only 11 remained. 11 souls huddled in a shallow cave carved into the mountainside, waiting for a miracle that would never come. Kale's tracking skills were the best in the tribe, a gift his father had drilled into him since childhood. He could read animal prints in snow like others read the stars. He could smell a herd of mammoths from 2 valleys away, but for 3 days there had been nothing. The herds had migrated south, fleeing the endless winter. The wolves that normally hunted these woods had vanished. Even the birds had abandoned them. The silence was unnatural. As the sun began its descent, a pale, weak thing that offered no warmth, Kale noticed something that made his blood freeze. Tracks, massive tracks, each one the size of his torso, pressed deep into the ice near the river's edge. The pattern was feline. He recognized the 4-toed print, the drag marks of claws that never fully retracted. But the size, nothing he'd ever seen or heard of in the elders' stories could have made these. He knelt closer, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The tracks were fresh, hours old at most, and they were heading directly toward his tribe's cave. Kyle's heart hammered against his ribs as he looked up at the darkening tree line, and that's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to this world. A roar deep and thunderous that shook snow from the pines and sent a flock of ravens scattering into the blood-red sky. Whatever had made those tracks was hunting, and it had already found them. Kyle ran. His legs burned, his lungs screamed for air in the frozen atmosphere, but he didn't stop. The roar still echoed in his skull, vibrating through his bones like the drums his people used to play before the hunger took their strength. He burst into the cave where his tribe huddled around their dying fire, and every face turned toward him with hollow, desperate eyes. "Something's coming," Kyle gasped, doubling over. "Something massive." His uncle Theron, the eldest warrior left alive, stood slowly. His weathered face showed no fear, only grim acceptance. "How massive?" "The tracks," Kyle struggled to find words. "They're bigger than anything in the elders' stories. Bigger than the cave bears. This thing, it's hunting us." A woman named Lyra clutched her infant son tighter. "We have nothing left to give. Not even our deaths will satisfy the winter." But old Mira, the tribe's keeper of memories, suddenly stood with an urgency that shocked them all. At 70 winters she rarely moved without help, but now her eyes blazed with recognition and terror. "The Painted Cave," she whispered. "We must go to the Painted Cave now." "We can't abandon the fire," Theron protested. "Without it." "There is knowledge there," Mira interrupted, her voice sharp as flint. "Knowledge the ancients left. I should have remembered sooner, but my mind—" She touched her temple, frustrated by age. "My grandmother took me there once when I was a child. There are warnings, pictures of a great beast, and beneath them instructions." Kyle exchanged glances with Theron. The Painted Cave was a half-day's journey through treacherous ice fields. Taking the entire tribe, weak and starving, was suicide. But staying here trapped against the mountain with that thing approaching... I'll go, Kale said. Alone I'm fastest. You'll die alone. Theron countered. We'll die together if I don't. Kyle grabbed his spear, a pitiful weapon against whatever made those tracks, and turned to Mira. How do I find it? The old woman's fingers, gnarled as ancient roots, gripped his arm with surprising strength. Follow the river north until you see the twin pines struck by lightning. Climb the eastern ridge. The cave mouth is hidden behind a frozen waterfall. Inside on the deepest wall you'll find them, the hunters who came before. They faced this devil and survived. Her eyes went distant, remembering. Or perhaps they only survived long enough to leave their warning. Kyle nodded, but as he turned to leave, Mira pulled him back one final time. Kyle, she whispered, her voice cracking. The paintings. They show more than just the beast. They show the price of defeating it. Before he could ask what she meant, another roar split the night, closer now. So close that ice cracked and fell from the cave ceiling. The giant lion had picked up their scent. The journey north was a descent into madness. Kale moved through a landscape that seemed designed to kill. Ice sheets that groaned beneath his weight, wind that tried to tear him from the cliffs, and always, the awareness that something enormous was tracking through the same wilderness. Twice he heard it. Once a distant roar that sent an avalanche cascading down a far mountain. The second time, closer, the sound of massive paws crunching through snow, followed by the wet tearing of flesh. The beast had found prey. Something had bought Kale time with its death. He found the twin pines as darkness swallowed the world. Two ancient trees, their tops shattered and blackened by lightning, standing like skeletal sentinels against the star-filled sky. Kale's exhausted legs carried him up the eastern ridge, his fingers numb, his face raw from the cold. When he finally saw the frozen waterfall, a curtain of ice gleaming in the moonlight, he nearly wept with relief. The cave entrance was exactly where Mira said it would be, a narrow opening behind the ice that exhaled stale, ancient air. Kyle squeezed through, using his last bit of flint to spark a small torch. The flames sputtered to life, and the walls came alive with images that stopped his heart. They were everywhere. Painted in ochre and ash, blood and crushed berries, scenes of horror and heroism that spanned the entire chamber. But it was the central image that commanded his attention, that made his torch-bearing hand shake. The giant lion. It was rendered with such detail, such visceral accuracy, that it seemed ready to leap from the stone. The artist had captured every terrifying feature, a mane that flowed like black fire, fangs as long as a man's forearm, eyes that held an intelligence that was almost human. The creature stood over fallen hunters, their bodies broken, their spears useless. But the painting showed something else, something that sent ice through Kale's veins. The lion wasn't natural. Around its neck, painted in faded red, was a symbol, a circle bisected by a jagged line. The same symbol appeared on cave walls throughout the chamber, always accompanied by smaller images. Images of men in strange garments, unlike any tribe Kyle knew. Men performing rituals, men feeding the beast, and then Kale saw the words. Not words as he knew them, but pictographs arranged in deliberate sequences. His grandmother had taught him the old language, the picture tongue that predated speech. His fingers traced the symbols, his lips moving as he translated, "The lion who walks in two worlds. Born of ritual, fed by the Moon Clan, destroyer of the pact. Kill the feeders, starve the beast. Only fire, the rest was smeared, deliberately scratched away by ancient hands, as if the knowledge itself was too dangerous to preserve." Kyle's torch flickered, and in the dancing shadows he saw the final painting, a massive paw print, and beneath it, unmistakably fresh, a single human handprint in what looked like blood. Someone had been here recently. Someone knew he was coming. Kale spun around, his spear raised, but the cave was empty. The handprint mocked him from the wall, still wet, still glistening. Whoever left it was close, watching. He backed toward the entrance, his mind racing. The paintings had revealed a horrifying truth. The giant lion wasn't just a predator. It was being kept alive, deliberately sustained by people who called themselves the Moon Clan. But why? What tribe would feed such a monster? The answer hit him like a fist to the gut. Control, fear, power. A tribe that commanded such a beast could control the migration routes, the hunting grounds, the very survival of every clan in the frozen lands. They could demand tribute, allegiance, sacrifice. They could play God with a weapon that wore fur and fangs. Kyle emerged from the cave into the night and immediately knew something was wrong. The forest had gone silent, that absolute suffocating silence that came before an attack. He pressed himself against the ice, scanning the darkness. They came from the trees like shadows given form, 5 of them. No, 7. Warriors wrapped in white furs that made them nearly invisible against the snow, their faces painted with the same symbol from the cave, the circle bisected by a jagged line. Moon Clan. They moved with the confidence of predators who'd never known defeat, encircling him with practiced precision. The largest stepped forward, and Kyle's world tilted. He recognized the gait, the broad shoulders, the way the man held his spear, loose but ready, exactly as he'd been taught. "Father?" The man stopped. Slowly he reached up and pulled down the hide covering his face, and Kyle saw the truth he'd been too desperate to question. His father, Chief Aaron of the Firekeepers, was alive, healthy, well-fed, and wearing the markings of the enemy. "You shouldn't have come here." "Son?" His father's voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. "This knowledge dies with the old ways. You left us to starve," Kyle's voice cracked. "Neera. She died in my arms. We thought I left to save you." Aaron's eyes flashed with anger. "The Moon Clan doesn't destroy tribes. We preserve them. We maintain order in the chaos. The lion culls the weak herds, drives survivors together, forces cooperation. Without it, humanity scatters and dies in isolation. You're feeding people to a monster." "I'm building a civilization," Aaron roared, and the other Moon Clan warriors gripped their weapons tighter. "Someone has to choose who lives and who dies, Kyle. Someone has to be strong enough to make the hard choices. Join us. Help us guide the lion. Your tracking skills, your intelligence, you could save thousands." Kyle stared at the man who taught him honor, courage, sacrifice. "And my tribe? My people?" His father's expression went cold. "Already gone. The lion reached your cave 2 hours ago." The words hit harder than any blade. Kyle's legs went weak, Theron, Lyra, and her baby. Old Mira, who'd sent him here knowing, and suddenly he understood. Mira had known. She'd sent him away not to find salvation, but to survive. She'd sacrificed herself to save him. Kyle's grief transformed into something sharp and lethal. He looked at his father, this stranger wearing a familiar face, and made his choice. "Then I have nothing left to lose." He drove his spear into the frozen ground and ran, not away from the Moon Clan, but toward the one place they couldn't follow, toward the giant lion's hunting ground. If he couldn't save his tribe, he'd make damn sure their deaths meant something. Kyle ran through the night with his father's warriors pursuing him, their torches flickering like angry stars through the forest. But he had something they didn't: desperation and knowledge of terrain. He led them in circles, doubled back, used every trick his father had ironically taught him, until finally their shouts faded into the wind. He was alone now, truly alone, and he was running toward the one thing every instinct screamed to avoid. Dawn broke grey and lifeless over the valley, where the giant lion hunted. Kyle crested the ridge, and what he saw below turned his stomach. This wasn't a natural hunting ground. It was an abattoir, a carefully maintained killing field. Hundreds of bones littered the valley floor. Mammoths, direwolves, cave bears, and among them, human remains, skulls arranged in deliberate patterns, ribs stacked like cordwood. This wasn't random predation. This was systematic, industrial. And at the valley's center, carved into the permafrost, was a massive enclosure, walls of sharpened stakes 10 feet high, forming a corral the size of a small village. Inside, Kyle could see movement, shadow people, prisoners, their cries weak and hopeless. The Moon Clan wasn't just feeding the lion, they were farming victims for it. Kyle's tactical mind raced despite his horror. He counted 6 guards patrolling the perimeter, another 4 tending fires that burned at each corner of the enclosure. The smoke carried a sickly sweet smell, some kind of ritual incense, and beyond the enclosure, a cave opening so vast it could swallow his entire tribe's shelter 3 times over, the lion's den. As he watched from his hidden position, a procession emerged from the tree line. 20 Moon Clan warriors leading a group of captives, men, women, children from tribes Kyle didn't recognize. They were bound with leather straps, stumbling with exhaustion and terror. His father walked at the front, carrying a ceremonial staff crowned with a lion's skull. Kyle realized with sick clarity that this was how the Moon Clan maintained their power. They captured tribes under the pretense of protection, then systematically fed them to their beast. The survivors, broken and terrified, would serve the clan out of fear and traumatic loyalty. It was genius. It was evil. It was sustainable. The lion emerged from its cave. Even from hundreds of feet away, Kyle felt his bladder weaken. The paintings hadn't captured the true scale. The creature stood 12 feet at the shoulder, its mane a dark corona that seemed to absorb light. Its eyes, those terrible, intelligent eyes, surveyed the offering with something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. But Kyle saw something else. Something the Moon Clan, in their arrogance, had missed. The lion was old. Its movements, though still powerful, carried the slight hesitation of advanced age. One of its massive paws bore an old injury, a limp barely perceptible, and its ribs beneath that magnificent coat showed just slightly more definition than they should. The beast was declining. Without constant feeding, without the Moon Clan's support, it would die on its own within seasons. They weren't controlling a god. They were keeping a dying king on life support. A wolf's howl pierced the dawn, a lone scout watching from the opposite ridge. Then another answered. And another. The wolves hadn't abandoned these lands, they'd been waiting for the giant lion to weaken enough to challenge. Nature was preparing to restore balance. Kyle just had to help it along. He looked at the ceremonial fires, at the enclosure where innocents waited to die, at his father preparing another sacrifice, and made a choice that would echo through millennia. If humanity was going to survive, it wouldn't be by feeding monsters. It would be by becoming something monsters feared. Kyle had no weapon capable of killing the giant lion, no strategy that ended with his survival. But as he watched his father raise that ceremonial staff, preparing to send innocent people to their deaths, he realized something profound. This moment wasn't about winning. It was about showing humanity what it could become when it stopped cowering before monsters, both animal and human. He grabbed a dead branch and thrust it into a ritual fire at the valley's edge. The Moon Clan guards spotted him immediately, shouting warnings, but Kyle was already moving. He sprinted along the ridge, his burning branch leaving a trail of sparks, and hurled it directly into the western ceremonial fire. The incense stores ignited like oil, flames exploded outward in a curtain of orange and gold, and the carefully arranged smoke patterns, whatever spell or scent had kept the lion docile during feedings, shattered instantly. The beast's head snapped up, its nostrils flaring, and for the first time in years, it smelled something other than controlled ritual. It smelled chaos, freedom, prey running in panic. The lion roared and the sound was apocalyptic. The enclosure stakes vibrated, the prisoners inside screamed, and the Moon Clan warriors who'd grown complacent in their power suddenly remembered what true terror felt like. Kyle was already igniting the second fire, then the third. Within seconds, smoke billowed across the valley in conflicting directions, confusing the lion's senses, breaking the clan's control. The beast charged, not at the prisoners but at the warriors themselves. Decades of conditioning shattered in an instant. As the lion's predatory instincts overrode its training, a Moon Clan warrior died first, snatched up in jaws that crushed his spine before he could scream. Two more fell to a single swipe of the massive paw, their bodies ragdolling across the frozen ground. The ceremonial formation dissolved into chaos. Kyle. His father's voice cut through the screams. "What have you done?" Kyle slid down the ridge, grabbed a fallen spear and ran directly toward the enclosure. The prisoners inside watched this wild-eyed young man approach and saw something in his face that transcended terror. They saw purpose. "When I break these stakes," Kyle shouted, "you run north. The wolves are gathering there. They'll protect their territory from the lion, but they'll let you pass. Go." He didn't wait for acknowledgement. Using the spear as a lever, he wrenched at the enclosure stakes while behind him. The giant lion tore through Moon Clan warriors like wheat before a scythe. These men had grown soft, accustomed to being masters rather than hunters. They died like prey. Aaron appeared through the smoke, his face contorted with rage and something that might have been grief. "You're destroying everything I built." "You built nothing." Kyle screamed back, finally breaking through the enclosure wall. "You fed on fear and called it civilization. The prisoners poured out, running for the tree line. Some wouldn't make it. The valley was chaos, fire and blood, and a monster finally unchained. But some would survive. Some would tell the story of the boy who chose destruction over submission. Aaron lunged at his son, and they collided in a tangle of limbs and fury. Father and son, rolling across frozen ground, years of training meeting raw desperation. Aaron was stronger, more experienced. But Kyle fought with the memory of Neera dying in his arms, of Mira sending him away with her final act of love, of every person who'd been fed to this nightmare. He fought for the dead who couldn't fight back. Kale's fingers found a shard of broken stone. He didn't hesitate. The makeshift blade found the gap in his father's furs, sliding between ribs with a wet sound that would haunt Kale forever. Aaron gasped, his eyes going wide. You were supposed to be better than me." "I am," Kyle whispered. "I chose them over power." His father slumped, and Kyle had no time to process what he'd done because the giant lion had finished with the Moon Clan warriors and was turning its attention to this final human. The beast that had terrorized the frozen lands for generations limped forward, blood matting its mane, ancient eyes fixing on Kale with recognition, hunter recognizing hunter. The wolf howls crescendoed from the ridge, dozens of them now emboldened by the lion's blood scent, by its visible weakness. They began descending into the valley, not to help Kale, but because they sensed opportunity. The old king was wounded, distracted, and the pack was done waiting. Kyle met the lion's gaze and saw something that shook him to his core. Not mindless rage, but exhaustion. This ancient creature had been enslaved as surely as the prisoners, fed not because it was hungry, but because men needed it to be fearsome. Controlled, diminished, reduced from apex predator to performing monster. For just a moment, human and beast shared perfect understanding. Then the wolves struck. They came in a silver wave, attacking the lion's flanks, hamstringing it, using pack tactics against solitary might. The giant lion fought magnificently. 3 wolves died in the first exchange, 4 more fell wounded, but age and injury betrayed it. The creature that had seemed immortal staggered, roared one final time that echoed across the valley like the death knell of an age, and fell. The wolves swarmed, and Kyle turned away. He walked through the valley of bones as the sun finally broke through the clouds, its light weak but real. Behind him, the last of the Moon Clan fled into the wilderness. Ahead he could see figures in the tree line, prisoners he'd freed, watching him with expressions caught between gratitude and disbelief. Kyle didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow. He'd killed his father. He'd destroyed the lion. He'd shattered a power structure that, however evil, had brought a kind of order to chaos. But he'd also done something else, something that would ripple forward through time. He'd shown humanity that it didn't need to worship its predators. That monsters, animal or human, only had the power we gave them. That sometimes survival meant burning everything down and trusting that something better would grow from the ashes. A young girl approached from the freed prisoners, no older than Neera had been. She looked up at Kale with eyes too old for her face and asked, "What do we do now?" Kale looked at the smoke rising from the valley, at the wolves claiming their territory, at the sun that promised nothing but another hard day of survival. He thought of his sister, his tribe, his father's final words, and he made one more choice. "We remember," he said quietly. "We remember what happened here. We tell the story, and we make sure that we never ever let our fear make monsters for us again." The girl nodded, and together, this broken young hunter and a child who'd been marked for sacrifice, they walked north into an uncertain future. Behind them, the giant lion's reign ended. Ahead, humanity's true journey was just beginning. So what do you think happened next? Did Kale's choice change the course of human evolution? Could we still be living with the echoes of that decision today? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story made you feel something, hit that subscribe button. There are more untold chapters of our past waiting to be discovered. Until next time, remember, we became the apex predator, not because we were the strongest, but because we refused to stay prey.